I have a tendency to speak quite fast, so if I start speaking relatively quickly, someone just wave at me and tell me to slow down. Okay, I'm an excitable boy, essentially, by background. So my name's Adam Benson-Clark. I'm the Deputy Director of Clinical and Service Development, which is a very long title for Resuscitation Council UK. My background is I'm a clinician, I'm a nurse by trade, I specialise in resuscitation and intensive care outreach advanced practice. And I'm here to talk to you today about our work programme. You can't hear me? There we go. A bit further forward. I could sit on top of this. Okay, thank you. You haven't missed anything exciting yet. Okay. First and foremost, I do want to say a huge congratulations to SCA for the award they've won in America. That is no mean feat by any standards at all, and it's absolutely fantastic that places like America are recognising the hard work which is coming out of organisations like SCA in the UK. So well done, Tom and Paul and team. So Resuscitation Council, who are we? We were formed in 1983. We're probably one of the oldest resuscitation councils in the world. In fact, we started the European Resuscitation Council, but they don't like to mention that either. And we're one of the largest as well. And our main mission really stems that we provide the national guidance for resuscitation practices throughout the UK, be it in hospital or out of hospital. We're also here to campaign and champion anything to do with resuscitation practice at a national level. So as Tom rightly said, we're frequently knocking on Parliament's door, reminding them that resuscitation is here, it is a valid speciality, and that survivors are an incredibly important part of that process. We also develop courses for healthcare professionals so that they can provide good quality care for individuals who had a cardiac arrest in and out of hospital. And we also support cutting-edge research into resuscitation practices. Essentially, our mission statement is we're working towards the day when everyone has the skills they need to save a life, okay, and beyond. And that's essentially why we're here today. So I'm here to talk to you about our work that we're looking to making equitable post-resuscitation rehabilitation care for survivors and co-survivors. So our history with SCA, quite rightly so, back in 2019, Tom came knocking at our door and told us that we're a bit awful when it comes to post-resus care and survivorship, and that we should be doing better. And quite frankly, we should have. You know, we'll put our hands up to that, and I think a lot of clinicians who specialise in resuscitation will also recognise this as a global trend. We then attended one of SCA's first conferences, and our team who went were actually blown away by members like yourself in the room, listening to your testimonies, your lived experiences, the challenges that you have as survivors and co-survivors. And it really opened up our eyes that there is that massive, massive inequality across the country, and we need to do better. We absolutely do. In turn, we invited you guys to come and speak at our conference, and we were very lucky to have Dave, Charlotte and Bernie come and attend, and they gave a couple of talks for us. And it was really empowering. We had a room full of clinicians who are resuscitation experts, and for most of them, it was the first time they heard stories and testimonies from survivors, from co-survivors, their key supporters, about the challenges they face post-resuscitation care. And that's really much because in a hospital, we don't see what happens when people leave ours. And I think Tom had mentioned that quite nicely within his talk there. And in 2022, we were quite lucky. We were helping SCA become a charity in its own right. Again, no mean feat. And we really want to help ensure that SCA become that go-to organisation for individuals who want help and support and guidance on survivorship and co-survivorship. And this led very nicely into our Vision 2030, which is our 10-year plan. And it's a 10-year plan because the NHS changes its mind every 5 minutes about what it wants to concentrate on. So we want to make sure we can shape and deliver. And this is very much based a lot on our chain of survival, which you saw earlier. And that's about encouraging everybody who has a cardiac arrest and has resuscitation treatment, that they're having the best evidence-based care, which enables them to have a good chance of survival and then meaningful recovery afterwards. In doing so, we want to make sure that everybody in the country has those skills to save a life, because that's equally important. Sadly, within the UK, for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, our survival rate is around 10%, which is diabolical. And we're working to improve that, and we know that we can do, because if we benchmark against other countries, like Norway, they've got a much higher cardiac arrest survival rate than we have, and then you look at Seattle, where they've got an elevated rate up to 70%, 60 to 70%, which is phenomenal. And that's about giving people the skills and knowledge to recognise, start CPR, use a defib, because the earlier we get these interventions in place, then the greater chance of survival individuals have, and if they get the survival early in, then they've got a better chance of having that quality of life afterwards. And we're also challenging having the use of having individuals who have a cardiac arrest against social inequalities. We want CPR, everyone to learn CPR and use it. We don't want people having cardiac arrest to be used as a form of inequality. We briefly heard earlier that it's part of the guidelines that we have post-resuscitation care, and it's in our guidelines. And again, we've let people down. And this was in 2021. So after we've had conversations with SCA and we're looking at the evidence, we derive our guidelines from recommendations from the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation and the European Resuscitation Council. And you can see we mentioned that people should have assessments post-resuscitation, that they should have a follow-up in 3 months, but we don't really give people the tools to do so. And again, it's left at individual organisations to decide how they're going to implement that. And that's not enough. We can do more, and we can certainly do better. So what we know is that we've got advances in resuscitation science, which is increasing the amount of cardiac arrest survivors, and that's fantastic. But we have a paucity where there's not enough happening, and we're falling short for the care that we need to provide. And actually what we do know is survivorship is not a quick fix. It's a long-term recovery process, and we need to support everybody involved in doing so. Having that as our baseline, we wanted to know more. So we actually did a survey of healthcare providers throughout the UK at what they offer and what they do for their cardiac arrest recovery programs in rehabilitation. Bearing in mind, we also know that not everybody has this service available. There's that real health inequality. And that sort of came through in the respondents. So survivorship and how it was assessed, there was inconsistencies in what was being assessed, looked at and what's being offered throughout the country. And again, as I say, some centres didn't offer anything, depending on what your route of your cardiac arrest was. We also found out that most centres didn't assess fatigue, and we've already heard that that's one of the most common conditions that individuals are really concerned with, and very, very few received any form of psychological support. And that's quite appalling when you think about the care requirements of survivors and co-survivors. Not surprisingly, very, very, very few offered any form of support for a co-survivor, for a key supporter. Again, the forgotten patient within this pathway here. However, reassuringly, every centre said they wanted to be able to offer that support, which is greatly reassuring. However, funding and staffing meant there was a big discrepancy in what they could offer. So what we want to really do is challenge that. And this leads us into our chain of survival. And this chain of survival has been around for donkey's years. I think it came out when I was actually still in school, which shows you how long ago this was created. It very much concentrates on recognition, getting someone to do early CPR and early defibrillation, because we know that that will help increase survival. But the challenges lay in that post-resuscitation care element. And I believe this part of the ring is a real misnomer, because it says there to restore quality of life. But when you look at the scientific evidence and the recommendations which come out, it's not necessarily about restoring quality of life, it's restoring organ function for the brain, for the heart. And that's where it falls off. And what we really want to do is challenge that status quo so that we have this extra ring which looks at enhancing that quality of life. And what does that mean? And that's not a thing that needs to be decided right at the end. This should be started and those conversations happening as soon as that patient's in hospital, with the patient, with the survivor, with the co-survivor and our key supporters, because this is really important for that meaningful recovery and quality of life. And this is emphasised in the NHS's 10-year plan. We want everybody to be able to do CPR and have meaningful resuscitation practices to increase survivorship, but we need to do more in what that actually means and looks like. So as moving on from that, we have committed to having a survivors advisory group and developing a quality standard for looking at what good quality rehabilitation care post-cardiac arrest will look like. And as I say, we're banging on the government's doors to make them listen to this. You might recognise some people in this photo. It's a nice sunny day in London, which doesn't happen very, very often. And we've got some I do love this photo. So this is essentially members within our survivors group, our survivors advisory group. And this group is to help keep our feet firmly on the ground so that when we look at campaigning work that we do and any policy work that we want to drive and push forward and present to government, that survivorship and co-survivors is right at the heart. Okay, so we're taking advice and guidance from yourselves in the room, and SCA play a really big part within this. We want to ensure that within this group, we have a ways and means that we can start campaigning against parliamentarians to really get them engaged with what we want to do. And we want to get parliamentarians committed to becoming cardiac arrest survivor advocates within their constituency so that they become the voice within Parliament for the survivors and co-survivors within their regions. We also want this group to help guide and advise us as we move forward and look at making care partnerships around the country to look at providing best quality guidance for areas in intermediate care boards for when we want to establish care programmes throughout the UK and not just in separate regions. In addition to this, we're looking at what our quality standard should look like. And for those of you who don't know what a quality standard is, it's basically a document which highlights best practice to providing high quality care throughout the UK. And we're very used to writing quality standards. We've got some really, really good ones for what you should do for managing cardiac arrest and running resuscitation services. So this is why we're very well qualified for writing this, going out into providing what should be a standard for rehabilitation care post-cardiac arrest. The key thing within this document is we want to reduce that inequality and make it non-discriminatory so everybody who has had a cardiac arrest, regardless of etiology, idiopathic cardiac arrest, everyone has access to this. And this is written with specialists at the table. So we've got senior clinicians, we've got rehabilitation specialists, we've got SCA at the table, we've got researchers who specialise in post-resus care and rehabilitation. And what we're doing is we're pulling together a document which outlines what centres should be offering as that baseline level of assessment for cardiac arrest survivors and their co-survivors and their key supporters. So it covers absolutely everybody, recognising that it's not a single person, it affects absolutely everybody in this person's life. And this should be an assessment which covers cognitive, functional, mental health, psychological support, fatigue, and where elements are required above and beyond that, that specialist referrals are made. And we also want it to direct people to SCA and SADS UK as well, recognising that local support groups are also hugely important in the recovery and rehabilitation of cardiac arrest survivors and co-survivors. And we're hoping that this will be heavily launched as part of our big campaign early next year. I believe it's in the final stages, and poor old Kirsty and Marcus are spending a lot of time writing this document, along with a lot of people actually sat on that table. And this leads me on to what I think is actually our crucial campaign as an organisation this year. And hopefully most of you may be familiar with that. We've certainly got members of the team here today. And I'm certainly looking at Bernie right in front of me with that gorgeous smile on the screen. And this is our right to recovery. And this is where we are knocking on the government's door to make them listen. So in early February, as alluded earlier, we attended the all-party parliamentary group. Try saying that after we've had a few gin and tonics. It's a bit of a tongue twister. And although that was a talk to primarily look at defibrillation, or defibrillators, it looked at the journey, because there's no point in increasing survivors if we're not going to look, increasing recovery from cardiac arrest if we're not going to help survivors. And what this really did is give us a platform to talk about and raise the needs of survivors and co-survivors in a government platform. And I would say that paper's being written up, and I would urge everybody to read that, and then we will start campaigning with that in hand. In June as well that year, we hosted a parliamentary event to raise awareness of the needs of post-cardiac arrest recovery and rehabilitation, and looking at that recovery plan. And this was quite phenomenal actually, and really well attended. So we had members of MPs across all parties and members of the House of Lords who came along, and importantly, they were able to speak to survivors and listen to their stories, their testimonies about how care failed them, what their support needs were, where their challenges lied. But also, and crucially, they were able to speak to family members to also see what that co-survivor's experience was. And that was really crucial, because that's really putting at the front of Parliament's door that there is an issue that we need to address. We were hoping that in the later government strategy that's going to be released this year, that then survivorship would be a fundamental part within that. They haven't included it within their cardiovascular care elements, which is a real shame, but it's not going to stop us campaigning and knocking on that door. Because quite excitingly, after we've had these events, we've had 2 instances where parliamentarians have started mentioning about survivorship within Parliament. So we've had Baroness Finlay, who raised a question in the House of Lords challenging the government to identify where we are going with survivorship post-cardiac arrest and what we're doing. And then Lord, and I'm always get this wrong because I want to say it's Lord Emmerdale, but it's Aberdale, 2 very different things. he actually called the government out quite nicely, saying we've got a massive inequality in what we're providing for survivors and co-survivors. What are we doing to address it? Because we're not doing enough. So whilst we're making these steps in, it's really reassuring to know that we've got elements within government where the voice of survivors is starting to be heard. And because we've got that way in, we're going to keep campaigning and we're going to keep knocking on that door and we're going to keep putting pressure on until we get it to a standard element of practice, very much like stroke rehab, where if somebody has a cardiac arrest, that the survivor and co-survivor get the adequate support and specialist person-centered support that they need going forward. And this is where we ask for your help. So this is the QR code that we've been talking about in some of the presentations earlier this morning. If you haven't already snapped it and signed the petition, please do. We need a minimum of 10,000 people signing so that we can get a response from Parliament. If we've got 100,000 people, then they will debate it in Parliament. So I ask you to take a screenshot of this, knock people down in the streets until they scan this and sign our petition, because this will give us that emphasis going forward. And this is certainly only the beginning of what we are doing to champion survivorship and co-survivors and key supporters to ensure that you guys get the right person-centred care that you expect throughout the UK. Thank you very, very much, guys. So just to reiterate,